All right, call to order. It is 6:38 according to my watch, and we can roll call, but I'll optimize that by just saying the only one not here is Kevin Chow, and for guests we have Jenny Griffin and Kevin Davis is also here. So public comment for items not on the agenda is item 2. Jenny, got anything to bring up?
Other than just to wish you all happy holidays, and I think, let's see, there was something I just can't remember. It just seems like the traffic is so much worse now. Yeah, that's about all. But you guys have a nice, safe holiday.
Okay. Thank you. You too. All right. Consent items. Item 3. Anybody want to move to approve the consent items? Make a motion.
I'll make a motion. Sorry.
Who got there first?
Take your pick.
I think Nupur got it. I'll second it.
Okay. Nupur and Misha seconded. All right. Any questions on the consent items by anybody? I mean, we're losing less money this year because we actually could do some lessons. Yeah, I worry in the long term that losing money. The COVID's going to take a lot longer than any of us thought initially. That's all we know. So we'll see what happens in the long run. Actually, and then the board meeting minutes look fine to me, and the check register, I signed all those checks, so I know they're fine with me if there are any questions. And we have to adopt the resolution to continue that the circumstances of state emergency continues to exist, and that we can have this meeting remotely. I'm hoping that will continue for quite a while, but Kevin assures us assured me that if that state of emergency goes away and we have to start meeting, quote, in person, we've got the equipment to meet in person and remotely. So those of you in Michigan, and Misha, where are you? What state are you in?
I'm back in California now.
You're in California. Okay. All right. So next one is those are the items on the consent calendar. Does anybody have any questions? Nope. Thank you for shaking your heads. All right. Does anybody oppose the consent items? All right. So it's unanimous, 4-0. All right. Information discussion items. No board action will be taken. General manager's report. Obviously, doing electronic payment is turning into is not straightforward and taking a lot of time, and that's the main item on there. I think that we might be. It's going to take a while. Do you have? But rather than me babbling on, Kevin, do you have anything to add to the manager's report?
I was just going to go through it just to bring more visibility to it, because I think we talked about just doing this a little bit more exposure on the manager's report. So I could just briefly go through it if that's all right.
Sure.
So we had another heater malfunction. The pool heater was refurbished a number of years ago, but again, the pool water is very harsh, and so a lot of times it can break down. So it broke down again for a few days, and we lost 6 hours of pool time as a result, unfortunately. But it's fixed and up and running now. As for our work plan, it says spring work plan. That should actually be winter work plan. The board orientation and support is late. So some of this includes the required sexual harassment training and ethics training. So I will follow up with anyone who hasn't done it yet, just to make sure that gets done soon. The site master plan, we did have a little bit of an update on this item. I met with a consultant the other day who we did a site walkthrough to put together the RFP. The RFP is a request for proposal. So we have to put together the request for proposal, basically to figure out what it is that we're asking the consultants to do, and then ask people to bid on that. But to do that, we need to know what it is we're trying to do and what kind of consultant we're looking for. And so it looks like what we're going to be looking for is probably one, maybe two architects to help us do this project. Now, the consultant who's helping with put together the RFP is doing this pro bono, meaning for free. So as a result, we're going to extend the project timeline because this person's pretty busy. So, but can't argue with free. So that's that. Let's see here. We're continuing to work on the new and amended policies, board policies. This will probably take up another 6 meetings or so just to really fill out the personnel and administrative policies for the board. Once that ends, I think there's going to be a very big and noticeable reduction in the number of policies that are going to be worked on every meeting. So that's going to be a much smaller share of future board meetings, probably about the middle of next year. The year-end close, one thing that's happening at this time, our fiscal year is not January to December, it's actually July 1st to June 30th. And so after June 30th, there's a process where we close out the books and we actually assign income that was we received in last fiscal year. We're going to push it into this fiscal year. And then, of course, we get audited. So the auditors should be coming out in December. And so we're kind of wrapping up that year-end close. Other than that, there's the electronic AP. This one is called bill.com. And what this will allow us to do is to get our bills online, and then it will automatically enter it into QuickBooks for us. And we check it and we add in whatever supporting documents we need, and then we can send this out to a director for approval, meaning that not all of, but most check signing can be done remotely using this system, and making it much more convenient for directors to both review and approve outgoing payments. So that's kind of a neat thing. We should be getting that online sometime in January or February. We're also working on the winter work plan. This one's kind of been paused a little bit, but this is most of the items that we look at in the summer. We do an autopsy at the end of summer. We look at what went well, what didn't go well, and what we want to improve for next year. So a lot of this is kind of procedural changes, maybe slight program changes, training changes, things like that to really optimize, because there's always things that we can do better. And the final thing, the electronic payments, this one has been a lot bigger than we anticipated. So the board earlier this year in the strategic planning had made it there's 2 major projects here. The electronic payments was a big priority. And the second one was the outreach project, which hasn't begun yet, but will in January. So the electronic payments, part of the problem that we were having is that we use several different systems to administer the operations of the district, right? We have a point of sale, which is separate from our lane reservation system, SCADA, which is separate from our lesson registration system. And then we have a kind of a hodgepodge of other methods of booking things, right? So if you did a hall rental, then that would be a paper system. So finding a way to take money for all of these things is a little bit complicated when you go for electronic, because each of those systems uses a different e-payment vendor. So we would have, 3 systems plus a paper system. And then we would also have to have 3 different e-payment vendors that would accept and then direct money to the bank. And this creates a lot of complexity, especially when you're talking about bringing money in. Right now, one of the nice things is that all the money comes in through our point of sale. And so tracking, whether something's been paid or not paid is easy. You just pull up one report. But what happens when you have 2 systems, right? Maybe someone could register and pay using the registration system, or they could register in person and pay over the point of sale. Now it's not so clear cut, and that creates a lot of problems. And so Sunny and Jay and myself, we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out if we could use our current systems and start introducing the e-payments vendors to those systems, but it ended up just being a little bit too much. So instead, we're looking at doing away with all of the systems and just choosing one big online system that would be able to do point of sale, customer relationship management, rental management, registration, and probably a few other things too. So right now we're evaluating a few different potential software. Some of them are a bit expensive. One of them in particular wouldn't even be able to be ready by the middle of next year. So that's maybe out. And again, this is a very labor intensive process. Part of the reason why is because we're replacing a bunch of systems, some of which we've actually tested and improved over the course of 5 years. And we're just going to sweep all that away and then try a new system. So in order to do it right, we have to be very careful about making sure that we choose the right system, implement it correctly, and we do the training correctly for incoming staff, so that when we do switch over next year, that there's very minimal disruption to programs. There will be obviously hiccups, but we try to minimize that. So this is a big project, and we'll definitely be putting everything into making sure that it's as successful as possible. That's the end of the manager's report.
Kevin, on that note, I think what the way you guys are approaching it makes a lot more sense, because plugging in different systems, it's going to be much harder than it is to plug in this one big system and retrain people. Training people is always easier. And you get one consolidated big thing, which you can kind of maintain easier. So thank you.
Yeah, it's just, it's a huge, much larger task than I ever conceived. And converting over to a new system is not going to be straightforward. Looks like we lost Misha again. So I hope she can come back soon. All right. Then I hesitate to, I was thinking it's not on the agenda, but in terms of your manager's report, I appreciate your offline report to all of us about what happened at the Parks and Rec meeting. So, and that's all I want to say about that, because we could spend half an hour talking about God knows what's going to happen. So, all right. Review and discuss amended board policies. Records retention and destruction. And do you have anything to add about these, Kevin? You already have written quite a bit.
I guess I would want to just answer any questions if anyone had any, just about why we would need this. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I don't think I have any questions about specifically what it does, but I mean the policies regarding the retention of data, but I was wondering what portions do you personally think are things that are more important to focus on as far as how long we store those records?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if we look at the hold on, got to get down there. The retention schedule. I think it's really important, first and foremost, to make sure that we're retaining the most important records. And it's not always clear what those are going to be. Not just right now, but maybe in the future. What happens when, let's say, there's another general manager or there's other staff? We need to have some kind of a clear-cut process for handling those types of documents and making sure the most important things are retained permanently. A lot of these are actually legal requirements as well, right? And so we actually had county council take a look at these and make sure that our retention schedule was up to date. So for me personally, I think the legal items are the most important, especially things that reduce liability. So for example, most of the personnel records, these tend to be super important, because if something was to happen, it's really helpful to have documents of, let's say that there was something happened, right? You want to have your accident reports, you want to have statements, you want to have the investigation, and what, if anything, was done about that. So I think that's really that's really the important factor, I think, for that. And a lot of these, again, there's, if you're keeping records on real property, if you're to buy property, the Rancho probably wouldn't buy property. But if we did, this would be something that would be important to keep permanently. From a different perspective, one thing that can happen with government agencies is that the Public Records Act can actually be weaponized, right? So when things kind of go south, when there's maybe like a conflict, for example, a political conflict, what happens is sometimes, groups can actually shut an agency down by just sending a whole lot of public records requests. And we're legally obligated to go through, find the records and provide it. So if we're not disposing of, employment applications, we could have decades of these things that county council has to go through. It ends up becoming very time consuming and very resource intensive. So to answer your question, all of it's really important, both on a practical level, but also on a legal and liability minimization level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess now that I'm thinking about it in that way, like you mentioned, the legal documents as far as reducing liability are important. Is there anything here then, I totally understand also the point about, people filing a ton of, FOIA requests and getting a ton of data, but are things like, accident reports something that we should maybe hang on to for more than 7 years? Like, for example, if it involves an employee of the district, right? And maybe hanging on to that until they've separated from the district, they're no longer employed, and then 7 years beyond that. Or do you think like 7 years as it is enough?
I think we just used what other districts have used, but we can definitely hold on. There's nothing wrong with holding on to records longer, particularly because there's not a whole lot of these types of records. Right. So holding on to them a few more years wouldn't cause any kinds of problems. One thing that we have done, because by the way, these retention schedules, these for certain other agencies can go on for, they're very long. This is actually a very simplified records retention schedule. So some of the numbers of years is actually, we just chose the closest year and made it that, so that there's not like this is held for 3 months, this is held for a year, this is held for 2 years, this is held, that just gets too crazy. Yeah. So this one is more or less 3 years, 7 years, or 10 years, or permanent. So if that's something that but if you think that the grievances, accident reports, and investigations should be 10 years, we can definitely do that. Okay. Or separation plus 10 or 7.
I think 7 years is okay. I think just like if it involves someone who's part of the district, right? And then they were to bring it up as an issue like after 7 years, that might be somewhat problematic, but the chance of something like that happening is so low that I don't think it's really important for us to save. I don't know if anyone else has other perspectives.
Kevin, I was wondering, because I'm sure we hire a lot of minors also, right? Is there any Minors Act or something that comes into play also where we need to watch out for that?
As far as records, not that I'm aware of. There's some very strange things. For example, most places that employ minors need to get work permits.
Yeah.
We actually are not required to as a government agency, but we do anyway.
Okay.
So
as long as we covering our bases and there's no you can't keep records for minors, we're good then. Yeah.
The only point I can think of where you need to retain records for permanent is future lawsuits. The extended, for instance, the one that comes to mind is sexual harassment. And I know Robin is handling those for her employer. They're cropping up 25 years later, but it's rare. And so I'm not sure how long we need to keep employment records. It looks like all we're keeping permanently is 1099 forms and 7 years for any investigation, which is what it would fall under. And I would think 7 years would be maybe enough, but without consulting her, I don't think they've had many cases that cropped up that far after the event. And the problem is when you have a lawsuit, in this case, I'm saying sexual harassment as an example. The problem is that people who they might be wanting to sue no longer work there or no longer on the board, let's say, after 7 years.
Isn't there some kind of a statute of limitations for most things?
Isn't there a statute of limitations?
Yeah,
There used to be.
duration.
Robin, is there still a statute of limitation on suits for harassment?
You've got harassment mixed up with abuse. And sexual
Abuse.
abuse.
Oh, she's right. I've got harassment mixed up with abuse. I'm sorry. That's a different matter. But anyway, but the other problem is in any record retention schedule, I know Kevin, before you guys became on the board, has gone through, and the other staff have gone through all the records, some of which dated back to 30 years ago, and purged a lot of them because we couldn't see that they were going to be of any use, right, Kevin? So.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the 1099 forms that are from, as far as I know, the IRS requires you to maintain records for 7 years only.
Yeah, so that one was from county council.
Okay,
They
got it.
recommended keeping it.
As long as it's, yeah, it works, yeah.
I don't necessarily understand why 1099s, but okay. I'm fine with keeping them.
Because, that is something that we can always request at any point from the IRS directly also.
Right. So yeah, permanent is good for that. Anyway, yeah, it's hard to see. We could find exceptions and want to lengthen all of them, but then we get into the problem, Kevin, where the heck are we going to keep all these records? We've got physical space limitations. So
I can check in with
Scan it into
county
the
council.
cloud? Do you need to keep physical documents? No, right? Yeah, storage is cheap. Yeah.
well,
Yeah, we've moved many, if not most, of our documents to digital. So we digitized, for example, any minutes and agendas that we found all the way back to 1955, a couple years ago. Yeah. So, and then we've been kind of purging those old documents so that we can, get more space. But going back to the harassment issue, I think this item is a discussion item. So what I'll do is I'll check back in with county council and see about, because of the statute of limitations, because some people are going back 25 years, is there a value? Should we be keeping these? Is there a liability for keeping them? Stuff like that. So I'll check back in next month on that item.
okay, that's a good idea because you're right. As a public entity, for most, if I understand it, for most claims, you have to claim within 6 months, and so I can't conceive of a lawsuit going more than 6 years after that. It'll be settled one way or another. So luckily in the long run, we had, to my knowledge, we've never had a negligent occurrence that ended up in court, or persisted for very long. So I think of the conflicts that we've had, they've been over pretty quickly. So, and they haven't reached courts. So, because our employees and our procedures are careful to make sure that we do our due diligence whenever there's an accident or something, an investigation, and they're handled fairly quickly, and so anyway. All right, well, I thought I'd bring that up because it's the only possibility I can see where having records that are permanent might help. But then again, given the terseness of many records that I've looked at, when we tried to look up something to see, did we used to do it that way? Nobody wrote it down, so So the records don't help in some cases when you would hope they would, but they don't hurt either. So anyway, okay. Any other questions on records retention? And how about the proposed policy 1000 amendment, getting rid of the second reading? That would be nice. I assume legal looked at that, Kevin, and said, that's okay.
Yeah, they were the ones who were actually like, it's kind of weird to do a first and second reading for policy. They said it's really more for ordinance, you do a first and second reading. So yeah, so I just wanted to bring this up because then it would make policy making a much faster.
True. All right. Yeah, I think that's it'll help. So anyway, anybody else with questions? Since these are information and discussion items and we don't have to take action, any changes we need to look into. So that's legal just to do a policy once. All right. You're right. Ordinances, generally speaking, appear twice. So, but these aren't ordinances. They're internal procedures. Yeah. Okay. No questions? Nothing. All right. So item 5, discussion and action items. Adopt amendment to policy 3000, delegation of authority. And 3020 and 5A3, 3025. Do we want to discuss all three of these at once, Kevin? See any problem with that?
That works for me. Yeah. If it's okay, I'll just go through all of them at once. They're somewhat related anyway. So the policy 3000, it's actually a section, right? So each of the policy groupings are in sections, right? So policy 3000 is mostly about the administration of the district, and that's the one that we're looking at right now. Once we finish this one, we'll go into policy section 2000, which is more about personnel, at which point we'll be looking at, nepotism policies, sexual harassment prevention policies, things like that. But for now, we're looking at section 3000. And originally there was just one policy in there, which gave a lot of authority to the general manager to run operations, but it also wasn't very specific about what powers that actually included and what the limitations were. And so what the amendment does is it specifically gives signing authority to the general manager, right? So, if something comes in that needs a signature, not financial, then the general manager could potentially sign that. So that's pretty helpful. There's also a few items that are financial. So for example, it would allow the general manager to sign specific types of checks. This would include refund checks, which are, there's a pretty big paper trail behind that. So it would only include money that's come in that could go out back again through the refund process. That would be signed by the general manager. This would reduce the workload on board members who have to sign, because it is generally pretty routine and very well documented and audited. The second type of check that the general manager would be able to sign, according to this policy as it's written, is an approved list of vendors. So this would be things like utilities, right? Things that don't need a whole lot of, visibility. So PG&E, the water bill, the electric bill. These are things that maybe aren't that interesting to board member looking to sign checks. However, if there's maybe a big one-time check, it's not a routine check anymore, and so that would be subject to having a board member sign it. So in what this would do, again, the policy 3000 amendment, it reduces the number of checks that the board members will sign, and it also allows the general manager to sign certain types of other documents. Any questions on that part? Okay, so 3020 is a new policy. This one is a delegation to the general manager to execute certain limited purchase orders and written agreements for goods and services. You can translate that into contracts. It wasn't clear from policy 3000 that the general manager has authority to enter into contracts on the board's behalf. And so this makes that very clear that yes, there is that authority and these are the limits to it. The limits that I would suggest for this one would be at least $10,000 for a limit there. This is because if something breaks in the pool room, that can easily be $10,000, and it would not be a great thing if we had to wait for a board meeting to get that approved. It also requires that contracts are reviewed by county council prior to being approved. Steve, are you having, do you have sound? It looked like you were not able to hear for a sec there.
Your sound is going down on me. I can't understand why. You're just getting much quieter.
It's
everyone
not
else?
only you, Steve, all of us. When your voice just became very low, Kevin.
Oh, really? Can you hear me now?
We
Yeah,
can
I
hear you, but it's way fainter than it was before.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can get into the settings.
Yeah, because I've had that happen on this app where it turns your volume down.
Honestly, it's been fine for me. I haven't noticed any difference in the sound.
I can try to just speak up. How about now?
Yeah, that's fine. Works.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
So where was I? 3020. Okay, so legal counsel will review all contracts prior to authorization, with the exception of emergency items where there's kind of a loss of property involved. So let's say there's a leak in the ceiling. True story. This happened a couple months ago. That would be something that I could approve a contract to get that fixed up without county council looking at it first.
Or even Roto-Rooter, when you have them come and unclog your drain, that's technically a contract, as you pointed out to me. And so we now it's made explicit that, yeah, you can enter into a contract on the basis, on the behalf of the district. And it was never put that way before, although it's technically a contract, so.
Correct. Yep. One of the consequences of doing this is that it will cost more, because any kind of contract that comes in, legal counsel will have to review, which is obviously expensive. So one of the things that we're doing to minimize that is creating what's called a standard form. So what happens, and this might, I'm hoping this will work well, we'll see. What that means is that we'll have a standard contract, and then we're going to attach the work order to that contract, and it includes indemnities and legal protections and whatnot. So if a contractor is okay using our standard form, then they would sign and we would sign the standard form, and then we're protected legally. If anything happens, then they're obligated to protect us, and vice versa in certain circumstances. And it's faster for legal counsel to authorize or to review, because most of it is stuff they've written already. The only drawback to this is that not all contractors will necessarily want to sign our standard form, right? Or they may even lack the authority to do so. If you're just a little guy in a big company, you don't necessarily have the authority to enter into a contract on behalf of your big company. So we'll see how this works out, but assuming that policy 3020 does get approved, we'll work on that standard form, and we'll find out we'll see what happens.
Hey, one more thing we could do is the standard companies you do use, right? Like Roto-Rooter or whoever, get their contracts pre-approved by the legal team. And that way, when they have to review it, or when you actually need to use the service, it's a quick review.
That makes sense.
So
Yeah.
if it's all reviewed in advance, then when you actually need to use them, it's a much quicker review.
Right. Thank you.
I
Except
noticed under,
We don't generally have a circumstance where we use a contractor over and over again and know when this is going to come up. I mean, the problem, the downside of what you're saying that jumps to my mind is vendors change all the time. And so pre-approving a standard form for them, I think it's going to end up being a waste of time, mainly because for the reason Kevin cited, if they're a little guy, they don't have the authority to sign it, and if they're a big guy, they'll have to send it to their lawyer. Meanwhile, we still have a leaking faucet, or whatever they came to fix for us, So a standardized form, I think, is practically speaking, maybe money down the drain, legal money down the drain. So, but we'll see. It's contractualizing more and more and formalizing things that maybe don't need to be formalized. I'm not sure. It's a double-edged sword, and for reasons that I'm sure everyone can see. I'm
I have
stating.
a question on
Go
that actually. Under the 3000 amendment, it says in the last subsection, it says that the vendors would be approved by the board. So I'm thinking we could either follow that same framework for 3020 or come back to addressing whether or not we should have a pre-approved list at all, because my question was regarding to that, on how that approval process would go, if that's something that we would have to do before we vote on 3000 and things like that.
Right. So the list is actually going to be for next month. I didn't have it ready for this month. So it's like a real list that you would look at. It would say, PG&E, San Jose Water Company, things like that, and then the board would approve it. Right now, if 3000 passes as it is, this is in here, but I wouldn't be able to do anything with it because there is no list, right? I'm sure we could potentially try something like that for 3020. But I'm not too sure how that would function in practice. But I think, like Director Sethi was saying, with some of the contractors we use very often, they use the same forms. So if we have those reviewed, then it would work. I think what County Council was worried about, and the reason why they were actually pushing to put this provision in, is because there's an indemnity clause where if something happens, if one of a landscaper cuts off their own toe, that landscaping company would be forced to defend us in court, right? So there's additional protections from having the standard form. So it's I don't know, it muted me all of a sudden. It's kind of a mixed bag. There are some pros and there's some definite cons.
I don't know why. I'm not sure. I hope people can hear me. All of a sudden, it got very quiet. Anyway, and yeah, I didn't realize these things could go down a hole. Luckily, we can. We're going to have to revisit these because we haven't passed a new policy saying adopt the policy with a single reading. All I'm saying is a standard form may or may not serve us well, and for the reasons that everybody's mentioning. So.
This is a second reading, so it is possible to pass these. They just wouldn't be very effective without the schedule of approvable vendors that we could pay for.
And you've also pointed out that one of the reasons we have to do this is it's part and parcel of enabling you to be able to sign checks. And so we had to do that. Sign documents, including checks. So, and legals reviewed it and said, okay, this is the wording we have to adopt, correct?
Well, they advise, they don't say we have to. So it's up to the board.
Recommend, yeah. Okay, I'll use the word recommend. Anyway, so.
I have a question. Is there a downside to waiting until next month and passing these in conjunction with the list of approved vendors?
Nope, there's no downside. I just wanted to kind of get things out as they were ready so that it's not just a big shotgun blast of policy, because there's more coming.
Good point.
But yes, if you wanted to wait to see what the entire package looks like, then that's definitely possible as well.
Yeah, I think I personally am leaning more towards that, but I'd love to hear the input of others.
I would agree. Yeah, let's just wait to do it all together.
Would you prefer to at least see, because there's probably going to be some that are even going to come in January. If that's the case, then would you prefer to see whatever policy is ready in December, just so you've seen it, and then in January, then have the one that where all of them would be passed at once?
So in December, we'll at least get a something, right? Of Rancho.
Yeah, we're working on a purchasing policy, and I'm drawing a blank right now. There's a few final items, and including the schedule of approved vendors and a purchasing policy, and there's one or two other things as well.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Steve, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. The downside of that is that recurring vendors are only about, let's say, half the checks I sign every month, maybe a little bit more than that. You know, refund checks are at least explicitly given in the lists, so that's also a large portion. But anytime we have something new, it's going to depend a lot on this electronic check signing system as it gets set up. I think Kevin might agree with that, you know. So and how easily that works, being able to remotely have a board member remotely approve that, you know. And we haven't seen it yet, so we don't know how well it's going to work, you know, till we try it. So, but the list you can come up with, what you're saying for next month, will be partial, and even the list you come up with in January will also be partial. I think that list will just keep growing as we get new vendors, you know.
Certainly, it's open to being changed whenever the board wants or whenever a new vendor, a regular vendor comes in. But what I was referring to is actually there's still other policy that would be part of this change.
Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. All right. That we haven't seen yet. Correct? Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah. So you're right. Misha's got a good point. And so we won't approve them this month. We'll see some more of it next month. And that's fine with everybody. Good.
So just to get clarification on this one, it sounds like for next month, I'll put the items on the agenda for everyone to see, and then, but not for approval. And then once everything is together, then it'll be an approval item. And I think we can do it with a resolution too. So it'll really all be tied together.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Speaking of adopting resolutions, I wanted to bounce back very quickly to item 3D, since it is a formal resolution to allow us to continue to meet remotely, that for purposes of signing it, we had all four members agree. One member was not present. And then we have we approved it as part of the consent items, you know. But the other one we have to approve is the next item on the business, which is adopt resolution 11182021A, adding the general manager as a listed key executive for the Wells Fargo bank account. Are there any questions about this one? All right. Well, I'll make the resolution. Who wants to second it?
Is this one of the, because this is part of the other policies, did we want to have all this go on at once? Or my understanding was that we were going to wait to have all the financial policies be done at the same time.
Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Well, I looked at the fact that it's a formal resolution, and so was the other thing where I just said, let's do a consent one, and everybody was in agreement with that. All four of us were in agreement. And I look at the signing page and it says, yeah, how many agreed, who wasn't there, and I just wanted to make sure that was explicit for the resolution 111182021 back in item 3. So, but you're saying, yeah, you do have a point. I guess if we're going to look at them as a whole next month, that adopting this resolution right now isn't productive. It's counterproductive. So, okay.
Let's just wait till next month.
Okay, we can do that. So that's the last item on here. Is there anything I missed? No. All right. Well, anyway, I think that backing up to the item before it, or actually it's part of everything. Its financial things have been it goes without saying, have been some of the most confusing stuff we've tried to do in a long time. and Newport, working with Wells Fargo, understands it even worse than we've learned in the last couple of years of just trying to do this. So we'll see what happens. All right. Anything else? No, I think we've covered everything. And so I guess we can move for adjournment. And 7:25 at 7:25. So I'll move to adjourn on the items of business. I wish we could have gotten more depth into some of these things, but once we dive into them, they go deeper. And as I said before you were here, Misha, I said, well, this is the last meeting. I'll be running the whole meeting. Next meeting after we have our election, you'll be finishing off the meeting. So I look forward to that. I'm sure you'll do a good job. So, all right. Second, do we need a second for adjournment? I forget. No? Kevin?
We can.
I I second if we need one.
We can actually do a without objection, but we can do it.
That's fine. I'll second.
Okay.
Right. That's the way I usually do it. Well, if there's no objection, we'll adjourn.